The first thing Rail Dorn noticed about the station was how quiet it was. Not silent. There were sounds everywhere. The hum of atmospheric processors, the click and scrape of alien feet on metal floors, the low vibration of the orbital stabilizers running somewhere deep in the walls. But it was quiet in the way that mattered. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was running. Nobody was carrying something that weighed more than they should have been able to carry. On the colony, there was always someone doing all three. Rail stood at the entry gate of the Crucible of Worlds with a single bag over one shoulder and a paper transfer document in his hand, because Commandant Ossel had told him the Academy's intake system sometimes rejected digital files from human colony terminals, and it was better to have something they could not argue with. The paper was a little crumpled. Rail had been holding it for 11 hours of transit. The intake officer was a Tolhari, tall, thin, with 4 pale arms and eyes that caught light in a way that made them look like wet glass. She looked at the paper. Then she looked at Rail. Then at the paper again. Dorn Rail. Human. Colony of origin. Caste 4. She said it flatly, as a list of facts she was confirming rather than announcing. Second-year combat and tactics track. Yes, Rail said. She processed him without further comment. He picked up his bag and walked through. The Crucible was built inside a hollowed asteroid, expanded over 2 centuries into something that held over 3,000 cadets from more than 40 species. The corridors were wide enough for Corvan cadets, who averaged nearly 3 meters tall. The ceilings were higher than they needed to be. The gravity was adjustable per zone, and the main transit corridors ran at standard Union gravity, which Rail's body understood as slightly less than nothing. He walked carefully for the first hour, adjusting his stride so he did not accidentally cover too much ground with each step. He found his assigned quarters without help. The room was small and clean. A bunk, a desk, a locker, a narrow window that looked out at the gas giant below. He put his bag down and stood at the window for a moment. The planet was enormous and violet and completely indifferent to him, which he found comfortable. He had 1 hour before orientation. He used it to unpack, eat a ration bar from his bag, and read the Academy's Code of Conduct document, which he had already read twice on the transit shuttle. Old habit. His mother had always said, read the rules before you need them. Orientation was held in a large hall that smelled like 6 different atmospheric blends running at low levels simultaneously. Rail found a seat near the middle and watched the other cadets arrive. There were Solhari, Tolhari, Corvan, a few species he did not recognize yet. Most of them moved in groups. Most of them were already talking to each other. A few looked at Rail with open curiosity. One Corvan cadet, big even by Corvan standards, with dark, banded markings across his neck, looked at Rail with something that was not curiosity. It was the look of someone filing information away for later use. Rail looked back at him for a moment. Then he looked at his orientation packet. The session was administrative. Transfer of records, assignment of training schedules, introduction to station rules. The officer running it was a Solhari named Vreth Kal. Rail had not known who he was before that moment. He learned quickly. 3 cadets near him whispered the name with the kind of tone reserved for someone either very respected or very feared, and in Rail's experience those 2 things usually came from the same root. Vreth Kal was tall, even by Solhari standards, 4 arms, a narrow face with eyes set wide, and the kind of controlled posture that looked relaxed until you noticed that every part of him was exactly where it was on purpose. He walked to the front of the hall without hurrying. He looked over the assembled cadets the way a person looks over terrain they already own. His gaze moved across the room and stopped at Rail. It was brief, just a pause. But the pauses that other cadets got were one kind of pause, the kind that meant nothing, and the pause Vreth Kal gave Rail was a different kind entirely. It was the pause of someone deciding what category to put something in. He apparently decided quickly. So, Vreth Kal said, and his voice carried without him raising it, which was its own kind of skill. The Union lets mud crawlers in now. He did not wait for a response. He moved on to the next item on his agenda. Around Rail, several cadets laughed, some openly, some into their hands. The Corvan with the banded markings made a sound that was probably the Corvan equivalent of a laugh. Rail did not react. He wrote the date and his room number in the margin of his orientation packet, because he always forgot those in the first few days, and he watched Vreth Kal continue speaking. He watched the way Vreth Kal's weight shifted when he turned. The way his upper arms moved slightly ahead of his lower ones. The slight pause in his stride when he reached the edge of the speaking space and turned back. All of it filed away without any particular intention. Just the habit of a person who had grown up somewhere that punished you for not paying attention. After orientation, he went to the mess hall. The mess hall was enormous and divided by atmospheric section. Rail's section was the mixed species area, which served food that was technically edible by most known Union species. He took a tray, selected items that looked like they might contain something he could use, and sat at an empty table near the far wall. A few minutes later, someone sat down across from him. She was Tolhari, but smaller than the intake officer, compact, with the characteristic pale arms and glass-bright eyes, but also with a pattern of small dark markings along her upper neck that Rail would later learn indicated her region of origin. She put her tray down, which held a collection of gray mineral chips that made a sound like gravel settling. "You are the human," she said. "Yes," Rail said. "I am Nira Sult. I study xenobiology in parallel with the tactics track." She picked up one of the mineral chips and put it in her mouth. "I have read several papers about human physiology. Some of them are contradictory. I would like to ask you questions, if that is acceptable." Rail considered her for a moment. She was looking at him with the clean directness of someone who was genuinely curious and had decided that the most efficient approach was to be honest about it. "That is acceptable," he said. "Is it true that you have a calcium skeletal structure that actually becomes more dense under sustained load?" "Yes." "And that your species' pain response includes a chemical process that can temporarily suppress its own signal?" "Sometimes. Depends on the context." She leaned forward slightly. "What is the colony like?" "Cas 4. I read it as classified as a marginal death world." Rail thought about that for a moment. How to explain Cas 4 to someone who had never felt gravity that wanted to press you flat, who had never heard the sound a tunnel makes the second before it decides to come down. "It is honest," he said finally. Nira tilted her head. "That is an unusual description for a planet." "It is an unusual planet." She accepted this. They ate in a quiet that was comfortable rather than empty. When they were done, she asked if they could do this again tomorrow. He said yes. She picked up her tray and left, and Rail sat for a moment longer, looking at the gas giant through the wide mess hall window. It was purple from this angle too. That evening, he ran the transit corridors for an hour at full stride, which the other cadets he passed found alarming, and he found approximately equivalent to a light warm-up. He did not explain himself. He returned to his room, cleaned up, and sat at his desk. He took out a small recording pad and opened a message file. He addressed it to his mother on Cas 4, knowing it would take 2 days to arrive. He told her the transit had been smooth. He told her the room was clean and the window had a good view. He told her the food was acceptable if unremarkable, and that the gravity was too light, but he was adjusting. He told her the commandant's transfer had gone through without problem. He did not tell her about Vreth Cal. Not yet. There was nothing to tell yet. He ended the message, sent it, and went to sleep. Outside, the Crucible of Worlds continued its slow orbit. 3,000 cadets from 40 species, all learning how to fight, how to lead, how to survive. And one quiet human from a high-gravity colony, who had grown up in a place that did not care whether you were ready for what came next. Casper had never cared about that either. It had simply waited to see what you would do. The combat hall smelled like sweat and metal and something faintly chemical that Rail could not identify, but that every other species in the room seemed to recognize, because they all stood a little straighter when they walked through the door. It was the smell of the wax Vreth Cal used to prepare the training floor. Rail would learn that later. For now he just noted it and moved to find a position where he could see the full room. There were 22 cadets in the session. Mixed species, Solhari, Corvin, Tolhari, 2 others Rail did not have names for yet. Nira was near the left wall, which was the section with the lowest impact floor matting, suited for species with lighter bone structures. The Corvin with the banded markings, whose name Rail had since learned was Drev, stood near the center with 2 other Corvin cadets, arms folded, already looking bored in the way that large things sometimes look bored when they are confident nothing in the room can trouble them. Rail stood near the back right. Vreth Cal entered without ceremony. He did not announce himself. He simply walked to the center of the floor and stood there, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when the person standing in them has made enough people understand that noise in their presence is a choice with consequences. He was wearing a training suit that left his 4 arms unencumbered. In the orientation hall, he had looked controlled. Here he looked different, still controlled, but the way a blade is controlled when someone who knows how to use it is holding it. Everything pointed. "This is the first session of Applied Combat Doctrine," he said. "You are here because you passed entry assessment. That means you are competent by the Union's standard measures. It does not mean you can fight." He paused. "Most of you cannot. We will begin to correct that." He spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating Solhari precision form. Rael had seen recordings of the form before. Nira had found him a few general archive files during their second mess hall meeting. But recordings did not carry the same information as watching something happen in real space. The form was built around 4-limbed coordination, 2 arms moving as a redirecting structure while the lower 2 arms delivered or blocked force. It looked fluid in a way that was almost hard to follow, not because it was fast, but because every movement connected to the next one without a gap. No wasted motion. No pauses. Just one continuous thread of action that could shift direction without ever fully stopping. Vrethkal demonstrated on a Corvin cadet who volunteered, the largest cadet in the room. The Corvin outweighed Vrethkal by a significant amount and was considerably broader. It did not matter. Vrethkal moved around the Corvin's attempts the way water moves around a stone, redirecting force rather than meeting it, and put the Corvin on the mat 3 times in under 90 seconds. The Corvin cadet got up each time looking more confused than hurt, which was probably the point. The cadets watching made sounds of approval. Drev made a sound that was slightly different, more measured, the sound of someone who found it impressive but would not say so directly. Then Vrethkal looked across the room and found Rael. "The Deathworlder," he said. "Come." Rael walked to the center of the floor. Vrethkal looked him over the way he had at orientation, that brief, categorizing pause. Then he addressed the room while looking at Rael. Adaptive response is one of the most important skills in close-quarters engagement. The form must function against any opponent, including non-standard ones. He said non-standard the way someone says it when they mean something else entirely. The human species relies on 2 primary mechanisms in combat: force application and pain tolerance. They do not, as a general rule, employ precision. We will demonstrate why that is a significant limitation. He settled into his opening stance. "Come," he said again, to Rael this time. Rael moved forward. The next 4 minutes were, from the outside, not very dramatic. Vrethkal was not trying to hurt Rael. He was demonstrating. He moved around Rael's attempts the same way he had moved around the Corvins: redirect, reposition, control. He put Rael on the mat once, let him rise, talked to the class while Rael was getting up about what he had done and why it worked, and what a more experienced opponent might have tried differently. Then he did it again. Then a 3rd time. Each time, Rael got up. Vrethkal narrated each fall with the calm authority of someone who has explained the same thing many times to many students. He talked about neural reflex architecture, about how the human nervous system was optimized for sustained exertion rather than precise reaction, about how species that evolved on high-gravity worlds tended toward force-based approaches because in high-gravity environments force was the most available variable. "The Deathworlder is not unintelligent," Vrethkal said, as Rael rose from the 3rd fall and reset his stance. "He is simply shaped by a different selection pressure. He is strong. He is durable. He does not quit easily. These are real qualities." He paused. "They are simply not sufficient. Endurance without precision is a very slow way to lose." Several cadets laughed. Drev made his low Corvin sound again. What Vrethkal was not watching, because it did not occur to him to watch it, was Rael's eyes. They were not the eyes of someone who was confused. They were not the eyes of someone in pain, or embarrassed, or angry. They were tracking. Every time Vrethkal moved, every time he shifted weight or coordinated his 4 arms for a redirect, Rael's eyes followed the movement from the feet up. He was not trying to predict the next action. He was recording the pattern of all of them. He was counting the timing between Vrethkal's upper and lower arm movements. He was noting the foot position that came before a redirect versus the one that came before a control hold. He was cataloging, at a speed and depth that nothing in Vrethkal's experience had suggested a species like this was capable of. Vrethkel did not see any of this. He saw a human cadet getting up 3 times without much visible distress, which he filed as the much-discussed Deathworlder pain tolerance, and he moved toward the end of the demonstration. "You are not a soldier," he said to Rail. He said it with the clean, informational tone of someone stating weather conditions. "You are an argument that the Union Committee needs to make better decisions." The room went quiet in a different way than before. Not the quiet of attention, the quiet of something being slightly too much. Rail looked at him. His face was even. "Thank you, Instructor," he said. He walked back to his position near the wall. Nira found him after the session ended, in the corridor outside. She walked quickly to match his pace, which was slightly faster than she was comfortable with. "That was unfair," she said. "Some of it was accurate," Rail said. "That is not the same as fair." Rail thought about this. "No, it is not." They walked for a moment in silence. Then Nira said, "You were watching his feet." Rail glanced at her. "Yes." "The whole time. Not his hands. His feet. The hands tell you what is happening. The feet tell you what comes next." She processed this. "What did you learn?" Rail was quiet for a moment. Then, that he has never fought something that did not follow the same timing assumptions he does. His form is built on a model. The model is very good. But it is a model. She looked at him. "What are you going to do with that?" "Nothing yet," Rail said. "I need more information first." That evening, he went to Nira's study terminal, which had access to the Academy's full historical archive, and asked her to pull every recorded sparring match Vrethkel had ever participated in. She pulled up the archive directory, scrolled, stopped. "There are 431 recordings," she said. "Yes," Rail said. He sat down in front of the terminal. "Can you leave this open? I will close it when I am done." Nira looked at the number again, then at Rail. "It is already late." "I know," Rail said. She left the terminal open. She went to her room. When she came back at first light the next morning to collect her study materials, the terminal was still active. The archive counter showed 431 recordings accessed. Rail was not there. His breakfast tray in the mess hall that morning showed that he had eaten, and on time, and he arrived at his first morning session without being late. He did not look tired. He looked, if anything, slightly more settled than he had the day before, like someone who had answered a question they had been carrying around. Nira sat across from him at the meal table and did not ask what he had found. She could tell from his posture that he would say when he was ready. She ate her mineral chips. He ate his ration meal that smelled like something she would not describe to other Tolhari. Outside the mess hall window, the gas giant turned slowly in the dark, enormous and violet and patient. It had been there for 4 billion years. It could wait a little longer. There is a sound that a tunnel makes before it falls. It is not loud. It is barely anything. A small tick, like someone tapping a single finger against stone, followed by a shift in air pressure so subtle that most people would not notice it at all. Rail had noticed it for the first time when he was 9 years old, standing 40 meters underground in the east corridor of the Cas-4 mining grid, and his father had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "There. That sound. Remember it." 2 hours later, the west section came down. They were not in it. They were already outside with the rest of the crew, because his father had heard the same sound. His father died in a different tunnel 2 years later, in a section no one had heard warn them. These things happened on Cas-4. The planet did not owe you anything. It did not give you warning because it cared about you. It gave you warning because warning was there, in the physics of the thing, and the only question was whether you were paying enough attention to catch it. Rail spent the 2 weeks after Vrethkel's combat session paying attention. He trained in the evenings, after the official sessions ended. He used the secondary training room on the lower deck, which was primarily allocated to Corvan cadets who wanted higher gravity simulation, and which was therefore usually empty by the late hours because the Corvan cadets had a curfew discipline their species culture enforced internally. Rail had the room to himself from roughly the second hour past standard evening meal until whatever time he decided to stop. He did not practice Solhari precision form. He had spent a night studying it, and he understood it well enough to know that understanding and executing were different things. The form was built on 4-limb coordination, and there were certain things a human body simply did not do in the same configuration. He could approximate some elements. He could not replicate the system. He did not try to. Instead, he identified what the system was built to defeat. He thought of it like a piece of machinery that he was looking at from the outside. What were its inputs? What were its assumptions? Where did those assumptions come from? He found 3. The first assumption was reflex timing. The form was calibrated for the standard galactic reflex arc, the average speed at which a given species registers a threat and begins a physical response. Human reflex arcs ran shorter than the galactic standard in most conditions. Not enormously, but measurably. Not fast enough to be called an advantage in most situations, but enough to matter in specific moments. The second assumption was pain compliance. Most combat systems, including precision form, used pain as a control tool. Apply pressure to a joint, apply pressure to a nerve cluster, and the opponent's own nervous system does part of the work for you. This worked on most species. It worked less reliably on humans from certain environments. Casper had been teaching the Dorn family about pain since before Rael was born, and what it had mainly taught them was that pain was information, not instruction. The third assumption was balance recovery timing. When a standard build species lost balance and began to fall, the recovery arc followed a predictable curve based on center of mass and neural response time. Precision form was built to use that curve. Rael's center of mass was lower than the form expected, because high-gravity colony births produced different bone density distributions, and his recovery arc did not follow the predicted curve. It was shorter and less linear. He worked on all 3, not as advantages. He was not fast enough or strong enough to make them into weapons on their own, but as variables that a well-prepared opponent could arrange to present at exactly the wrong moment, from the other person's perspective. It was slow work. It was not exciting. He did it the same way his mother had taught him to check the tunnel sensors, systematically, without skipping sections, without assuming that the part he was least interested in was the part he could afford to ignore. Nira came to watch sometimes. She would sit on the equipment bench with her mineral chips and her study tablet and occasionally ask a question. Rael would answer if the question was practical and continue if it was not. She did not take it personally. It reminded her, she told him once, of watching her aunt work. Her aunt was a structural biologist and had the same quality of being fully inside whatever she was doing, not rude about it, just elsewhere in a specific kind of way. Rael said that was a fair description. About 10 days into this, Drev appeared in the doorway of the secondary training room. He was alone, which was unusual for Drev. He stood in the doorway and watched Rael run a movement sequence for approximately 2 minutes without saying anything. Then he walked in, crossed the room, and stopped about 2 meters away. "What are you doing?" Drev asked. "Training," Rael said. "I can see that. Training for what?" Rael stopped the sequence. He looked at Drev. "What do you want?" Drev was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did not react. In the corridor, when I shoved you." Rael remembered this. 4 days ago, in the main corridor outside the tactics lecture room, Drev and his 2 Corvin classmates, moving fast in the wide corridor, one of them shoulder-checking Rael hard enough to knock a lighter species sideways. Rael had rebalanced and walked on. "No," Rael said. "I did not." "Most people react," Drev said. "Not threatening now. More like he was working something out. Even if they do not fight, they step back. They make a sound." "I know," Rael said. "Why did you not?" Rael considered how to answer this in a way that was useful rather than complicated. "On the colony," he said, "if you reacted every time the ground moved, you would spend all day reacting. You learn to sort out what needs a response from what does not." Drev was quiet for a moment. "You are from a death world." "Yes." "Cal says that does not mean anything." "Cal has not been to one," Rael said. Another silence. Then Drev made a short sound that was not quite a word and walked out of the room. Rael watched him go, then went back to his movement sequence. In the Academy's main combat class, 12 days after the first sparring session, Vreth ran a theoretical exercise. He described a scenario, a larger opponent, closing distance fast, and asked the class to propose the optimal initial defensive posture. Several cadets gave answers based on precision form principles. Vreth acknowledged each one with brief commentary. Rael gave his answer in terms of weight distribution and momentum redirection using the attacker's own mass, which was, technically, the same underlying logic as the precision form answer, expressed in different language from a different tradition. Vreth looked at him for a moment. "That is not the answer," he said. "The form's first principle is that defense begins before contact. What you are describing is reaction, not anticipation. They are not the same. They produce the same outcome in this scenario, Rail said. From a different philosophical foundation, Vrethkal said. Philosophy is not irrelevant. A system built on reaction will fail in the scenario where reaction is not possible. A system built on anticipation will not. He moved on to the next cadet. After class, Nira walked with Rail toward the meal hall. She was clearly irritated in the careful way Tolhari showed irritation, which was mainly a very slight tightening around the eyes. He was not right, she said. Your answer worked for the stated scenario. He was not wrong either, Rail said. You cannot both be right and wrong at the same time. He was right about his system, Rail said. I was right about mine. They are not the same system. Nira thought about this. You are not angry, she said. It was not a question. No, Rail said. She tilted her head slightly. You have been in that training room every night for 2 weeks. You watched 400 recordings in one night. You are clearly preparing something. She paused. And yet you are not angry. Rail was quiet for a moment. They had reached the entrance to the meal hall. The gas giant was visible through the far window again, filling the lower half of the view with violet cloud bands. Anger is fuel, he said. I am not ready to use it yet. Nira looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the gas giant. Then she went inside to get her mineral chips. Rail followed her in. He got his tray. He sat down. He ate. He thought about the east corridor on Cass 4. About the sound a tunnel makes before it gives. About the fact that warning was always there, if you were paying attention, and that patience was not the same as waiting. Patience was watching until you understood what you were looking at. He was starting to understand. The petition form was 3 pages long and had not been used in 22 years. Rail found it in the Academy's regulation archive on a Tuesday morning, cross-referenced under Formal Challenge, Open Challenge Protocol, Instructor Division. It was technically a standard document, available to any enrolled cadet in good standing. It required a stated reason, a witness signature, and approval from a station officer of rank 3 or above. He filled it out neatly, in the plain block script his mother had made him practice until it was legible by anyone, human or otherwise. He stated his reason in one sentence: to test combat readiness against qualified opposition under standardized conditions. He asked Nira to witness. She read the form, looked at him, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she pressed her mark to the signature line. He submitted the form to the station administration office at the 3rd hour of the working day. The officer at the desk took it, glanced at the target name in the challenge field, and looked up at Rail with the expression of someone recalculating a situation rapidly. This targets Instructor Vrethkal, the officer said. Yes, Rail said. For a formal bout. Yes. The officer looked at the form again, then at Rail, then at the form. I will need to forward this for review. I understand, Rail said. Thank you. He walked back to his morning session. The form reached Commandant Ossel's office by midday. Ossel was the senior human officer at the Crucible, not a regular presence, more of a transfer authority who operated out of a small office on the administrative level and occasionally appeared at cadet reviews. He was old for active service, with the specific type of old that comes from decades in environments that did not particularly want you to stay healthy. He read the form once, set it down, picked it up, and read it again. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Not in doubt. In the way of someone who recognizes the shape of a thing they have seen before from a different angle. He approved the petition. He did it without contacting Rail and without adding any notation to the file. The notification went to Vrethkal's terminal at the 15th hour. Rail was not present to see Vrethkal receive it, but the mess hall at dinner that evening told its own version of events. Vrethkal entered the hall, which he did not always do. Instructors typically ate in a separate section, and he stood at the front of the shared space and spoke without raising his voice, which was enough to get the room's attention because the room already knew how to respond to him. He held up the notification tablet. I have received a formal challenge petition from Cadet Dorn, he said. The human, 2nd year, tactics track. He paused. He looked across the assembled cadets with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite contempt, but lived somewhere between them. I have accepted. He set the tablet down. I want you all to attend, he continued. Not because the outcome is uncertain. It is not. I want you to attend because this is a teaching moment of a rare and specific kind. The cadet's instinct to challenge is itself a product of the Deathworld environment. The same selection pressure that produces endurance and pain tolerance also produces a response to perceived threat that bypasses measured assessment. In human behavioral literature, it is sometimes called the aggression reflex. He paused again. He is not being reckless. He is being exactly what his biology made him. And tomorrow morning, you will see, clearly and under standardized conditions, why precision will always be the superior system. He picked up his tray. Get some rest, he said, to the room in general. It will be a useful morning. He walked to the instructor section. The room exhaled around him. Around Rael's usual table, the response was divided. Several Solhari cadets near the window were already talking, which Rael understood from posture and tone to be the equivalent of agreeing with Vreth-Cal. 3 Tolhari cadets who sat near Nira looked at Rael with a Tolhari expression that meant something between concern and respect. Drev, across the hall at the Corvin table, said nothing. He sat with his arms folded and looked at the table surface. Nira sat down across from Rael. She put her tray down carefully, the way she did when she was organizing her thoughts. You knew he would do that, she said. I thought he might, Rael said. Are you worried? Rael considered this. It was a genuine question, and it deserved a genuine answer. Yes, he said. A little. He is very good, Nira said. Not to discourage. Just accurately. I know, Rael said. I have watched him 431 times. And he has a habit, Rael said. When he believes the fight is finished, he shifts his approach. Just slightly. He gets more efficient. He stops leaving margin. Nira thought about this. What does that mean, practically? It means there is a window, Rael said. A very small one. She looked at him for a long moment. Is that enough? Rael picked up his utensil. I do not know yet, he said honestly. But it is what I have. They ate. The hall slowly returned to its normal noise level around them. After dinner, Rael was in the corridor heading back to his quarters when he heard steps behind him. Heavy ones, Corvin wait. He did not stop walking. Dorn, Drev said. Rael slowed and turned. Drev was alone again. He stopped a respectful distance away, more respectful than he had ever kept before. I want to say something, Drev said. He looked mildly uncomfortable with this, the way beings who are not used to saying things they mean always look uncomfortable with it. What you are doing is not stupid. Rael waited. Corvin doctrine says a challenge issued is a challenge that must be respected, not because you will win, because you were willing to stand. Drev paused. We say it differently in our language. It translates poorly, but the idea is that the standing matters more than the outcome. Rael nodded. I will be there in the morning, Drev said. Then he walked away, back down the corridor, and did not look back. Rael watched him go. Then he walked to his room. He sat at his desk. He did not study. He did not run movement sequences in the narrow floor space. He sat for a while in the low light and thought about his father, about the sound a tunnel makes. About the fact that knowing the warning exists is not the same as being ready for what it warns you about. You can know a thing is coming and still be caught by it if your preparation is incomplete. He thought about Vreth-Cal's habit, the efficiency that came when the fight felt finished, the closing of margins. He thought, yes, that is the moment. After a while, there was a soft tap at his door. He opened it. Commandant Ossel was standing in the corridor in his plain uniform, hands at his sides, looking for all the world like someone who had just happened to be walking past. Commandant, Rael said. Cadet, Ossel said. He did not ask to come in. How is your mother? Well, Rael said, slightly surprised. She sends messages regularly. Good woman, Ossel said. He had met her once, at the colony, when Rael's transfer paperwork was being processed. He had apparently remembered. I only have one thing to say, and then I will leave you to your evening. Rael waited. The point, Ossel said, is not to win. Rael looked at him. The point, Ossel said, is what you leave behind when it is over, regardless of the outcome. Think about that. He nodded once, turned, and walked back down the corridor with the unhurried pace of someone who had made their point and required no acknowledgement of it. Rael closed the door. He sat back down at his desk. He thought about it. He thought about it for a long time. Then he set his recall timer, turned off the light, and lay down. Outside the window, the gas giant's cloud bands caught the distant light of the system's star and glowed a deep, old purple, the color of something that had seen more years than anything on the station could imagine, and had kept moving anyway. Rail closed his eyes. He slept. Nobody made Rail walk to the arena alone. That was just how it happened. He left his quarters at the 6th hour of the station's morning cycle, when the corridor lights had just shifted from the dim amber of night mode to the standard white of the working day. The hall was empty. His footsteps were the only sound. He did not mind this. He had made most of the important walks in his life alone. Down the east corridor on Cass 4, to the tunnel entrance on shift mornings, to the clinic the day after his father's section came down. Company was good. Silence was also fine. Both were just conditions. The arena was the academy's main sparring hall, which was also where formal bouts and assessments took place. When Rail arrived, it was already full. He had not expected that. The challenge had been in formal notice, dinner announcement, one evening's warning. But the hall was at close to capacity, cadets standing in the upper gallery, lining the lower walkway, packed into the bench sections that ran along 3 walls. 300, approximately. Maybe more. He recognized species by posture and shape from the entryway. He found Nira on the left bench, the low-impact section. She had arrived early enough to have a clear line of sight. She looked at him when he entered. She did not wave. She just looked, and the look was the specific kind that meant, "I am here." He nodded once and walked to the bout floor. Vrethkal was already there. He stood near the center marker with 2 senior instructors who were serving as formal observers. He was in full training kit, for arms loose and ready, posture so precisely calibrated it looked like rest, but was not. When Rail walked onto the floor, Vrethkal looked at him with an expression that was not quite dismissive and not quite interested, but something in between, the look of someone doing a job that is straightforward enough to require some patience, but not much preparation. The referee, a senior Tolhari officer, spoke briefly. Standard Solhari bout protocol. No lethal strikes. No weapons. First submission or confirmed inability to continue ends the bout. The floor was standard training surface, not the high-impact mat, because precision form did not require heavy impact to demonstrate. Understood, the referee said. Vrethkal said yes in the Solhari way. Rail said yes. They moved to their starting positions. Vrethkal settled into his opening stance with the ease of something he had done 10,000 times. For arms arranged in the form's first configuration, upper arms out at shoulder level, redirecting posture, lower arms closer in, ready to deliver or absorb. Weight balanced on both feet, forward-rear distribution at the precise ratio the form specified for an opponent of this approximate size. Rail stood almost still. His feet were roughly shoulder-width apart. His arms were at his sides, slightly bent at the elbow. He looked, to most of the watching cadets, like someone who had not decided what to do yet. Nira, who had watched him train for 2 weeks, saw something different. She saw someone who was not giving Vrethkal anything to read. The referee signaled. The bout began. Vrethkal moved first. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and opened with a feint, upper right arm forward, drawing the eye, while his lower left arm positioned for the real first contact. A standard opening. Against a standard opponent, the feint produced a reaction, and the reaction created an opening for the second action. Rail did not react to the feint. His head tracked it. His body did not move. The expected opening did not appear. Vrethkal adjusted in a fraction of a second. He was too skilled not to, and shifted to contact. His lower left arm came in and redirected. It was clean, technically flawless. It should have moved Rail off his center. Rail moved with it instead of against it, which meant the redirect did not produce the angular momentum the form required for the follow-on. Vrethkal's second action landed on a target that had not behaved the way the system predicted. The first exchange ended with no advantage. Vrethkal stepped back. Something in his expression changed very slightly. Not alarm, not yet, but a small reclassification. He came in again. The second exchange was longer. Vrethkal varied his approach, different combinations, testing. He landed 2 clean strikes to Rail's upper body. Both landed. Neither dropped Rail. This was the pain tolerance variable that the recordings had never given Rail's full measure of, because you cannot watch endurance. You can only watch the results of it. Vrethkal watched the results with growing attention. Rail moved again. He was slower than Vrethkal in pure speed of motion, but in the second exchange he landed one strike of his own. Single arm, upper shoulder, not a finishing blow. He had not tried for a finishing blow. He had tried for a specific target based on a specific observation from recording number 208, which showed that Vrethkal's upper right shoulder had a slightly reduced range of motion compared to his other three limbs. Old injury, possibly. Just enough to matter at the right moment. Vrethkal felt it. He showed nothing on his face, but he adjusted his upper right configuration by approximately 3 degrees, which was itself information. The hall had gone quiet. It was not the quiet of a crowd that had lost interest. It was the opposite. It was the quiet of 300 observers who were watching something that was not going the way they had expected and did not know what to do with that yet. The third exchange was the longest. Vrethkal was not playing now. He was working. He cycled through the form's intermediate-level combinations, more complex, less predictable, the kind of sequences he typically did not need in a standard bout. He was fully present in the fight in a way that the earlier part had not required of him. Rail was taking more damage. It showed. There was a cut above his left eye from a strike that had redirected off an attempted block. His right arm had absorbed 2 control attempts that had not fully worked but had not been without effect. He was breathing harder. He was also still standing. And he was still watching. Every exchange, he was watching. Not with fear. With the same focused attention he brought to everything. The East Corridor attention, the attention that sorted signal from noise and did not panic either way. Then Vrethkal made his move. It was the move from recording number 344 and number 401 and number 427. The closing sequence. The one he went to when he had assessed that the fight was functionally over. It began with a 2-arm commitment, upper arms spreading wide in a containment posture, followed by a rapid close that locked both of the opponent's arms and swept the base. It was nearly impossible to defend against if you did not know it was coming, because the commitment happened fast, and it happened from a position of strength. Against a human opponent who was already damaged, it should have worked without question. Vrethkal committed to it. Rail let the initial 2-arm containment begin. For 1 full second he appeared to simply be caught by it. Vrethkal's attention went to completing the arm lock, which was the moment, the exact moment from 431 recordings, where his margin closed and his focus narrowed to the finish. And in that second, Rail moved his shoulder. Not dramatically. A rotation. The human shoulder joint has a range of motion that the Solhari form had never been designed to account for, because no Solhari, and no species whose combat the form had been built against, shared it. Rail's shoulder rolled through the containment in a direction that was not supposed to be available. It did not break the hold. It compromised it. It shifted the angle. And that was enough. He used what he had. Both hands found the joint of Vrethkal's upper right arm, the shoulder that had shown 3 degrees of restriction since the second exchange, and he applied pressure at the angle that the reduced range of motion made into a lever. The shift in the arena was immediate. Not a sound. A change in the air. Vrethkal was caught. He was held at the shoulder joint, at an angle his arm could not easily move through, by a being whose grip strength came from 18 years of high-gravity colony work. He tried to break it. He brought his other arms into it. Rail absorbed the force and did not move. The grip held. Vrethkal tried again. The joint made a sound. The arena was absolutely still. Rail did not move. He held the hold with everything he had. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. Not triumphant. Not cold. Just honest. "You can stop this," he said. Vrethkal tried to break the hold again. He was too good to try less than everything. His body gave everything. The joint gave first. The sound was not loud, but it was clear. And Surgeon Yoel, who was positioned on the bench near the official observers as standard protocol for all formal bouts, was already moving before the referee called it. Bout concluded, the referee said. Rail released the hold immediately. He stepped back. He stood straight, breathing through his nose, blood from the cut above his eye running down the left side of his face. He looked down at Vrethkal for a moment. Vrethkal was being stabilized by the medical team, his upper right arm at an angle it should not be at. His face was turned away. Rail looked up at the hall. 300 faces. 300 species-specific expressions. Most of them he could not read precisely. Some of them were readable enough. He was not looking for approval. He was not sure what he was looking for. He walked to the bench where Nero was sitting and sat down beside her. She did not say anything. She handed him a water container without being asked. He drank. Somewhere in the back of the hall, in the Corvin section, there was a short, sharp sound. A single beat, the Corvin sound for acknowledged, superior fighter. It was Drev's voice. Then Drev sat down again. It was a small sound in a large hall, but it moved across the room in a way that small sounds sometimes do when they carry the right weight. By the time the hall began to empty, something had shifted. Rail could not have named exactly what. It was not celebration. It was not deference. It was something quieter, a recalibration maybe, a revision of a category. He sat with Nero while the hall cleared and the medical team worked and the gas giant turned outside the high windows, still violet, still enormous, still entirely indifferent to the business of what things were capable of. It had not needed to watch to know. It already knew. Surgeon Yoel filed her medical report at the second hour after the bout. She wrote it plainly, without editorial comment, because that was how medical reports were supposed to be written. The instructor had sustained a dislocated shoulder with significant damage to the surrounding joint structure, ligament involvement, and fracture to the upper arm bone at the articulation point. Recovery timeline was 4 to 6 standard months. Full return of function was probable, but not certain. The injury had occurred during a legal formal bout conducted within standard academy protocol. The cadet who had caused the injury had released the hold the moment the referee called the bout. She noted all of this in the report. She signed it. She sent it. Then she sat at her desk for a moment before moving to her next patient, and she thought about the moment just before she had moved toward the floor. The sound of the joint, the stillness of the arena, and the human cadet standing in the middle of it, face cut, breathing hard, with an expression that had not been satisfaction or anger, but something she found harder to name. She filed it away and went back to work. The internal review took 2 days. It was not a punishment hearing. There was nothing to punish because nothing illegal had occurred. It was a standard documentation process for any formal bout that resulted in significant injury. Rail attended, answered questions in plain language, and confirmed that Vreth Cal had been given the opportunity to submit. The reviewing officer asked him twice, because the official protocol required verification. Rail confirmed twice. The hearing ended. Commandant Ossel's report on the adequate assessment of human combat doctrine in Union training institutions had already been filed and forwarded to the Union's Military Education Board before the review even began. It was 11 pages long. The first 3 pages summarized the Crucible's existing documentation on human physical capability. The remaining 8 made a precise, detailed argument that the current assessment framework was built on assumptions that did not hold when the subject species had originated on a world with task force classification. It used Rail's name exactly once in a citation. Everything else was institutional language, dry and careful and impossible to dismiss as personal sentiment. Rail did not know about the report. He was eating breakfast. On the 4th day after the bout, a data package arrived at his terminal. No sender name. The file header identified it as the complete Solhari Precision Form Training Archive, all 8 levels, including the restricted upper forms that were not part of the Academy's standard curriculum and were not, technically, shared outside the Solhari academic tradition. There was no message, just the files. Rail sat and looked at the package icon for a while. He thought about what it cost someone to send a thing like that. Not financially, the other kind of cost. The kind that required you to sit with yourself and decide that the person who had beaten you had earned something you valued. He opened the archive. He started with level 1. Not because he could not have started higher. He had watched all 400 recordings, and he knew the form structure well enough to place himself somewhere around mid-level 4 by self-assessment. He started at level 1 because that was how you learned something properly. You started at the beginning, and you did not skip sections because you were in a hurry, and you did not assume that the parts you already knew were the parts you could afford to ignore. His mother had taught him that with tunnel mapping. It applied to most things. The Academy changed around him in the following weeks, but quietly. He did not become famous in the way that some events made people famous. There was no celebration. The Crucible did not work that way. What happened was more like a slow adjustment. The way a room shifts when the furniture is rearranged, and after a few days it is hard to remember exactly how it had been before. Cadets who had passed him in corridors without acknowledgement began to make small gestures, species-specific ones. Some were formal, brief posture shifts that carried specific meanings in their cultures. Some were simpler, just a nod. Drev moved one table closer in the mess hall, and then the week after that, one table closer again, until he was at the table directly beside Rael and Neris. He did not ask permission. He just sat there, with his two Corvin classmates who followed his lead in most things, and ate his meal, and occasionally said something to Rael that was more or less a sentence. It was, Rael understood, a significant gesture by Corvin standards. The cadets who did not adjust were also fine. Not everyone had to. He was not collecting something. He was just here to learn. Nira asked him about it one afternoon, 3 weeks after the bout, when they were walking back from the tactics lecture, and the corridor was nearly empty, and the light was that particular angle that came in through the station's port windows in the late afternoon and turned everything slightly gold. Does it feel different? She asked. The academy. Being here now. Rael thought about that. A little, he said. Not the way I expected. What did you expect? He thought again. I'm not sure. Something more external, maybe. A door opening. Something like that. He paused. It is more internal than that. It is more like, I understand something now that I did not fully understand before. What do you understand? Why the commandant said what he said. About the point not being to win. Nira waited. The win was a moment, Rael said. What remains is different from the win. The archive Vreth Cal sent. Drev moving his table. The review being clean. Ossel's report, whatever it says. He paused. What remains is the argument. That the thing was real. That it happened, and was not nothing. Nira was quiet for a moment. They reached the branch in the corridor where she went left, and he went right. She stopped and looked at him with the glass-bright Tolhari eyes that always seemed to be taking in more than the visible light. That's the part, she said, that no assessment of humans I have ever read includes. That you are afraid of yourselves. That you hold back. That you have the capacity, and you know the capacity, and you are afraid of what it means. Yes, Rael said. That is the hardest thing to explain to someone who has not seen it, she said. What it is like to watch a being hold back. Rael looked at her. Every species that survives long enough gets there, he said. The fear of what you can do. The discipline to choose the line. He paused. We just got there faster. The planet made sure of it. She nodded slowly. Then she went left, and he went right, and the corridor light continued to come through the windows at its late afternoon angle, indifferent to the conversation it had just witnessed. That evening, Rael opened a message file and wrote to his mother. The message was longer than his usual ones. He told her about the bout in plain terms. Who? What? Outcome. He told her about Vrethkal's archive and what it meant. He told her about Nira, who asked good questions and ate rocks. He told her about Drev, who was large and said very little but meant most of what he said. He told her about Commandant Ossel, who had knocked on his door the night before the bout and said one sentence and then left, which was exactly the right amount of Ossel. He told her the gravity was still too light. He told her he missed the sound of the colony at night, the deep geological hum of the rock, the way the planet moved under you at low frequency, so constant you stopped hearing it consciously, but felt wrong in its absence. He told her, I think I understand now what you meant. About being from somewhere that wants to kill you. You stop being afraid of the place eventually. You just become afraid of losing it. Of losing what it made you. Of going soft in the light gravity and the clean air and forgetting what quiet really sounds like. He told her he was studying the Solhari archive from the beginning. Level 1. He would do it properly. He told her he was fine. He sent the message. He opened the archive. The first level had 47 instructional segments, and he started at segment 1, which covered the foundational weight principle. He had seen it done correctly 431 times, and he knew what it was supposed to look like. He started learning it anyway. Outside the window, the gas giant held its orbit the same way it had held it for 4 billion years, without effort, without thought, without anything that could be called patience, because patience implies the possibility of giving up. The planet did not give up. It did not consider the option. It simply continued, enormous and violet, in the way of things that have been shaped by forces beyond their own choosing and have become, in that shaping, exactly what they are. Rael read the first segment, then the second, then the third. He had time.